time for a child that you're providing this environment, I think is something that we all have to strive harder and see. And it's one of the issues that we've raised also with the National Children's Hospital, is that it's there for the whole gamut of the child's age. So we're not just dealing with a very young child, but like that we do, you know, they're teenagers as well, will have rare diseases, and we need to ensure that we also deal with that. So they're the specific questions I have to ask. Thank you.
Two other speakers indicated, so I'll take them now, Senator Burke and Senator Crown. Senator Burke.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming along this morning, and for everyone for their dedication and commitment on this whole area. And I suppose when I came across it first 3.5 years ago, it was a case of everyone kind of trying to fight their own corner, which is extremely difficult, and I think it's extremely important that we all work together to try and come to give assistance and help to families where there's a member of the family has a rare disease. One of the issues I just want to raise, and that's in relation to the cross-border healthcare directive, the EU directive of 2011. I'm just wondering, could I clarify if that actually has been transposed? Because my understanding is that it hasn't been transposed, and I'm open to correction on that. And as regards, have we got any kind of idea as regards when it will be transposed? And I suppose the second issue is in relation to the treatment abroad at the moment. One of the problems, and I think all our Oireachtas members have come across this problem about treatment abroad, in some cases there's no problem and it's very efficient and it works very well. But in other cases, it's a battle that goes on for 2-3 months, and I find families totally traumatised by the whole process. And I'm just wondering, and it varies from HSE area to HSE area, and from issue to issue, or you know, the medical condition from one medical condition to another. I'm just wondering, has there been anything put in place to try and make that more efficient and less time-consuming? And it's something I think that really needs to be done, because where a family have someone who requires treatment abroad, the last thing they need is indecision, because they've already come through a fairly traumatic time, and you know that it's important that they get access and a decision on that matter. And the third issue I just want to raise is this whole issue about respite care, and Avril and Tony might maybe talk to us a little bit about the issue of respite care and whether you're happy with the availability of respite care at the moment from your own experience of dealing with families, and do you think there could be a lot more done as regards trying to improve that for families that require it? I think it's extremely important, and I've come across a number of families recently, and I just raised it earlier before we went into the session, about where I feel families who are, you know, providing 24/7 care for a member of their family, and then they're finding they're not getting the necessary support from other services. So I'm just, and that's why I think respite care is so fundamentally important for our families. So you might just outline your own experience and feel, and maybe outline where you think there could be some improvements in that area. Thank you.
Senator Crown.
I'd also like to give a big fáilte to all of the guests and presenters who have come in today, and I'd like to beg their indulgence if I sound tired and cranky, but it's just recently dawned on me that I'm now nearly into my 22nd year of being back in Ireland and trying to grapple with some of the issues that you did with a common disease. And just a couple of points to make. We're not doing real well with the common diseases either. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try on the rare diseases we need to, but I just would caution you on a certain issue of prioritisation. The thing which made the difference for cancer care in Ireland was not setting up the bureaucracy called the National Cancer Control Programme. It was when Michael Noonan, in about 1995, made a very public statement. I believe I may have the dates wrong. It was his first speech as Minister for Health, and he made the point that there were hospitals in the country where he wouldn't let a relative of his go with cancer, which I gently remind him was an ever so slight plagiarism of something I had said the year before, but that's fine. I was honoured that he would. And he said about appointing cancer specialists. And that's what made the difference. And cancer mortality rates started improving in this country, especially in breast cancer, which was probably the area which was most efficient in terms of available treatments not being made available in Ireland. Then, way before the National Cancer Control Programme was set up, the National Cancer Control Programme had, I believe, nothing to do with improving. It's introduced certain streamlines, but it did not actually materially affect the outcome. So please don't take this the wrong way. But I want you to understand that somebody coming away from this message would get them, from this meeting, would get the message that the country which has the smallest number of pediatricians, the smallest number of adult and pediatric neurologists, the smallest number of adult and pediatric dermatologists, nearly non-existent pediatric endocrinology despite our obesity epidemic, and very few adult endocrinologists, that what we really need as a priority to fix the management of uncommon diseases is to set up a new bureaucracy and a registry. Okay? Now, we may well need a new bureaucracy in the registry, but we're not going to fix the problem until we grapple with the fundamental structural problems of Irish healthcare, which are, I believe, nowhere nearer to being fixed now than they were when I first started pointing them out over 2 decades ago. Another core problem, I think, if you look at the places that have done best, I'm guessing, with individual rare diseases, I would, and I have not formally studied this, I have in the case of cancer. What has typically happened is that a very leading, eminent medical school-based medical center develops an interest in the program. And they can only do that if they have sufficient resources, sufficient personnel to allow subspecialization to develop. Unlike the situation in Ireland where we expect pediatricians to look after, pediatric asthma in kids who come in with, all kinds of infections, and then try and give some kind of a specialist service to people who have uncommon or rare diseases. So unless we grapple with those issues of numbers and grapple with the fundamentally irrational nature of our medical schools, of having 6 medical schools in a small population, twice the European average, about 2.5 times the United States number per head of population, none of which, to be honest with you, are remotely excellent, okay? And which there are highlighting individual cases of people who've done brilliant jobs in difficult circumstances in building internationally recognized units, but we don't systematically approach this at all right. I have to just say something about the National Centre for Medical Genetics, because I have a dog in this fight. We use genetics services primarily historically in breast cancer patients where we see a suspicious family history. We want to find out if they have a genetic syndrome, which would be of great relevance to their own health and to other members of their family in terms of the early diagnosis or indeed the prevention in some cases of cancer. But the reality is we didn't stop having a national genetic centre. We never had one. We had a really good academic centre that Andrew Green, to his extraordinary credit, built up mainly on research funding, with very limited statutory funding. In fact, he and I would have had a gentle historical disagreement because we both applied for a grant at the same time for research purposes, which ended up getting his unit up and running in a large scale, and they've done a very good job with it. But he's been providing a genetic service on a national basis without having the kind of structure or ring-fenced budget that a national centre would have. So when Crumlin, in the most recent of its paroxysm of financial turmoils, as all of our hospitals did, found itself facing financial problems, they said, well, and trust me, this has happened in Vincent. I've been told over the years, don't take patients from Galway, they're not in our catchment area. We're not a national centre for any of these cancers. Make them go to their local hospital. And they'd say, their local hospital doesn't have an oncologist. They'd say, tough. Okay? That's what happens. So doctors, I believe, behaving ethically, have overcome very unethical administrative impediments that have been put in their way of providing a service to patients. So, thank you. See, we're very polite down here. Good morning to you too. I would urge you, while undoubtedly there's a lot to be said for getting proper registration procedures and getting connected to the international networks that we can tap into the expertise, you need also to become advocates for reform of the service, for reform of the number of doctors, and for reform of the structure of the medical schools. And Gurma Hagwiv.
Deputy McLaren.
I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you here today and to thank you ever so much for your very comprehensive presentations, and particularly for sharing some of your personal experiences also. Just, I suppose, with regard to a few things that struck me, with regard to the Rare Disease Office and the staffing of it, there's, I note that, is it an administrator 0.3 of a whole-time equivalent? you know, that's about 13 hours a week, and it strikes me that that would hardly open emails or open the post. And, you know, the fact that we have 6 to 8,000 rare diseases, it just strikes me as absolutely shocking. It's just something that I wanted to say. I think in your presentations you've outlined very well what needs to be done, and I think it's very simple, and it sounds extremely logical. We just need to get to that point. Also, with regard, thank you for sharing with us with regard to you know, the life-changing implications it has on families and how it affects you financially. And I think there's a huge lack of understanding there as to how rare diseases can actually affect a family and how people assess that. I also wanted to note as well from your National Rare Disease Plan for Ireland, I was looking through it last night, that between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 of rare disease patients wait over a year for assessment by an appropriate rare disease specialist, and that respondents felt that an appointment with a specialist should follow within 3 months. That's quite logical. I mean, for somebody with a rare disease and families, the trauma of not knowing and having to wait for a year to see a specialist is just not at all in any way near acceptable. I just have maybe 2 or 3 follow-up questions with regard to CF, and maybe somebody here can actually answer them. If not, well, I apologise. But I'm just wondering how many children in Ireland are currently being treated under the trial period of the groundbreaking drug Kalydeco for cystic fibrosis. And we know that the drug can lead to significant improvements for patients with a particular mutation of cystic fibrosis. And I'm just wondering, can anybody give me an update on their progress? Have there been any side effects while they've been on these drugs? And are there any plans to extend the supplying of Kalydeco to further members of patients in Ireland? And when are the trials scheduled to continue with the CF sufferers? And does length of time of treatment vary from child to child or from age group to age group? And how will it be determined when a person should be taken off the treatment of Kalydeco? Now, I don't know if anybody can answer that, but if you can, I'd be delighted. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Stephen?
Thank you, Chairman. And maybe a lot of issues have been raised. Maybe I just address some of them. I mean, first of all, I agree completely with the sentiment here that rare diseases are not rare, they're common. That's very much kind of part of our thinking. And I'm going to come back really first initially to what something Senator Crown said. I think, you know, that this struck us very early on that there really was a lack of a clinical focus with regard to rare diseases. It's a little bit different from cancer because a number of, you know, very prominent cancer specialists like yourself and everything else, I mean, were able to take the initiative, and from that we've got a cancer program, and indeed setting up things like a clinical research network like ICOR and all the rest of it. I think that lack of focus was lacking, and I think we were aware of this very early on, and we didn't really want to wait to publish the plan. We said, look, one of the first things we got to get going here is establishing a clinical program on rare diseases. And and in fact that led then to the appointment of Professor Alan Tracy. We talked to the then clinical director Barry White, and he agreed to do that. So that was very important to get that clinical focus, because it was lacking. It wasn't that patients were being treated, of course they were, but there was no common themes emerging and being done in isolation in hospitals here and so on, and that really wasn't feel to be a good thing. Now, in terms of how we moved it on, I mean, yes, we can talk about structures and all the rest of it. I mean, our key, what we're going to do in priority initially was to start making things happen. So while we didn't have an oversight committee, what we did instead is have a number of meetings with the HSE, particularly around the establishment of the office. We felt this was a priority issue to get going. And to do that, there were a number of things we need to do. We need to secure and tie down the funding from the EU and then match it then with the EU funding. And then that was the basis then for kind of the proposal then that Helen has outlined there for you today, with further staff and everything else, and we can come back and talk about more whether that's sufficient or not. Deputy Keller, you raised the issue about collaboration and everything else, and of course we do. I mean, this is a pan-European wide issue, and in fact it goes across Europe. As you know, patients are treated outside of Europe as well. Yes, myself and my colleague here, Liam McCormack, are members of USARD. where all of these issues are being debated, and they're very practical issues around the development of the European reference networks, how we're going to tie into these, what the quality criteria for our centres of expertise are going to be, and all the rest of it. Now, I think it's fair to say that work has been a little bit slower being progressed than we thought. I mean, but by the end of this year, we should be in a position that we will be, countries like ourselves, we need to be designating our centres. So therefore, the work that Helen has just outlined there about, you know, the National Centre for Medical Genetics for inherited metabolic disease and HHC. So we would be able to kind of maybe be in a position to designate these into Europe and so on. The bit about training and everything else in medical schools, yeah, I mean, that's very much in our report. I mean, it's not that these conditions are not part of the medical curriculum. Yes, they are, but I think we need to do a little bit more. We need more information on rare diseases, and Deputy Crane raised the issue about registers. I think it's very interesting. If you look at our report, you'll see there's about 40 different sources of information where we had to go to get to try to build up a compendium of cases of rare diseases. And within that, there's about maybe 10, 12 registers, and some of them we're very well familiar with, like the National Cancer Registry, and it's operating under particular kind of code of governance and standards, and the Cystic Fibrosis Register. Other registers will be less developed. We also have a very strong European Congenital Anomaly Register, EuroCat, in this country. And we did have a discussion amongst the group about what the best thing to do in relation to trying to kind of bring these together, whether we're talking of a single national register or something else. And we said, look, at this point, really, it's probably more important that we, in first instance, develop a network of registers so that we could apply common standards of governance and ways of working across these registers, rather than simply to move straight into a national register for rare diseases where we really wouldn't have all of those standards agreed and all the rest of it. So that is very much part of our thinking, and that's one of the functions of the office. Now, of course, the people in the office are not the only people who will be contributing to this, because behind the other registers, you have staff working there as well, and we would fully expect they would be contributing to this work. You know, whether it's the National Cancer Registry, whether it's EuroCat staff or people like that, they would assist in trying to help develop this network. And of course, it would require the support of the patient organisations who themselves would develop registers as well. So I think we would be looking for that to happen too. Of course, we have legislation, and some of it enacted, the Health Identifiers Bill, and that's going to help us. And then, more importantly, the Health Information Bill, because that will provide an opportunity for registers to be prescribed. And then, once that happens, then they can operate then in accordance with common operating procedures and common standards, and that will make it an awful lot easier, kind of, when that happens. Let me see, the issue of the National Centre for Medical Genetics, I might maybe ask the HC maybe to talk to that, but I think, as I said, when you know, we are talking about designating centres, national centres, and that is going to be one of them. I mean, so, you know, the work that's going on about that and mapping care pathways through the National Clinical Programme and everything else, I think will then bring us to a better understanding of what we need and what that centre is going to look like. And how it then operates within a European context. So maybe the HSC maybe could talk a little bit more about that. I'm sorry, just in relation to the issue of the CF drugs, we don't have that information. It's quite specific and detailed, but we can see, and if we can make it available for you. Okay. Sorry, and maybe just some research. Maybe just leave it on that. Again, like we have, I mean, like there is a good amount of money that's going into rare disease research. Indeed, over from the HRB source alone, 2010-14, approximately 6.8 million, and it covers a whole variety of different individual rare diseases. And indeed, last November, the Minister for Health announced 1.9 million funding for rare disease as well, with through the HRB in cooperation with the NGOs. So I mean, that's very welcome. But I think, I mean, there is more to do in this space, because like Ireland isn't going to be able to solve the problem of rare disease research on itself. It's very much being part of these bigger European networks like ECRIN and ERIC, and I think these are mentioned by my colleagues here, and on biobanking as well, because you know, the very nature of these rare diseases, where some of them are so like they're actually ultra rare, means you really need pan-European research, and we would be very supportive of, you know, when the centres of expertise get designated and the clinicians take a lead in this, that they would come together, form a network and make applications as part of a broader European network infrastructure. Thank you.
Tony, question straight to you for an answer.
Okay. Predominantly, the questions with regards to personal experience in getting respite and other support care services. Our own personal situation, we were offered respite in an acute hospital full of infection for a child, 2 children who were prone to infection. And any child with multi-systematic breakdowns of their immune system and other functions is not, in my opinion, or the opinion of some of the doctors who cared for our kids, the best place to put them, and that continues. At the moment, respite is exceptionally limited, if any, and where it is located is we are self-funding, without state support, transporting children from across Ireland, from Donegal to Kerry into Laurelin is one of the principal places, and kids are going in there typically for 1 or 2 nights rest after travelling for 5 hours on a bumbulance. We only have 1 bumbulance, a second one on the way. But so the opportunities for respite, but we shouldn't look at the opportunities for it, we should look at the benefits for respite. There is a cost saving, and there's been dull questions on this. The amount of money spent by the HSE on community nursing and other such facilities and agency nursing in providing respite and support care is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. I believe it's in a region of 78 million on the question we asked over a year ago. By coordinating several areas within and provide infrastructure, as in respite facilities such as Liam's Lodge, it streamlines accessibility to maybe 1.5 to 2 hours journey for any family to respite. Respite will give them headspace. We never got headspace. We didn't actually personally get genetic counselling. 1 child was already dead and the other one was nearly gone. And that was over a 5-year period. And PGD and other stuff we got, quite frankly, information which was not aligned to where it should have been. So the actual personal experiences are quite strong, and but we're trying to be proactive here. But there needs to be a greater emphasis on the patient's needs and the parents' needs. They are the 24/7 carers. They don't have, you hear figures, and I'd like for correction as well, or if I'm wrong, there's more home care packages and there's more home helps and more things, but quantify it in hours and quantify it in actual time provided to support families, not in how many families are receiving home helps and other such services, because the figures, the input and the outputs are not the same. So I do think that has to be improved drastically. While I agree with all the colleagues about collaboration of care and respite, or research and everything else, practical stuff can happen now. There are many people there. The Rare Disease Office identified, and it's welcome, a good start to a certain degree. But if you look at the whole time equivalents and the budgets, and you look at the volume of people, it's about €1 a head in year 1. That's the investment. You're talking 6 to 8% of the population in their lifetime, 275 to 330,000 people, and the initial budget is €1 a head. We need to prioritise and get the respite done as well.
Evelyn?
Thank you. Thanks to everyone. I'm Evelyn Mulroe from iPosy, and I just wanted to come back on the comment that was made by Deputy McLennan about cystic fibrosis and clinical trials. The product ivacaftor was in clinical trials, but it's now on the market. So patients in Ireland would have had access to the clinical trial, and it kind of goes back to what Senator Crine was talking about earlier in the context of registries. We are in a position in Ireland to attract research into this country for cancer and for cystic fibrosis because we have a registry of patients, and we have information on patients and their clinical and personal information that's necessary to access trials. So registries are really important in the context of research. But I want to go back to Professor Crine's point on specialist care, and I think he's right. Eurordis, which is the European Rare Disease Organisation, recently did a survey with patients who are experiencing difficulty in Europe, and there are 2,000 patients who responded to that survey. 90 of them were Irish, and they had the highest rate of issues around access to specialist care. It wasn't around access to treatments or access to drugs, it was around access to specialist care. So we do have an issue here in that context. But if I'm thinking of the people outside, you know, and the people who have rare conditions, the people I know and interact with, and Avril and Tony know and interact with. It's really difficult when we live in a country where we don't have health information. when we don't have unique identifiers within our hospital system. If you have a rare condition and you visit one hospital and you go to another one the following week because you happen to be visiting a different time, you're in trouble. And I think, you know, so while it's not a rare disease issue, the Health Information Bill is really, really important. The implementation of it is even more important. The adoption of unique identifiers to ensure that every citizen in this country has their health information collected somewhere. And that's an area that is probably another discussion for another day, but in the context of rare conditions, it really matters. And the other process that's missing is health economics. Because in terms of orphan drugs, and those are the drugs, and there's only 72 of them since the orphan drug regulation, there aren't that many, there aren't treatments for every rare condition that are out there, there are only a few, and where there are, particularly for the ultra orphan, so where you're talking about maybe 1 in 50,000 people, they're high cost. There's less people with them. There's less people with the condition, so the cost to develop the drug is the same, and they're high cost. And in those situations, the system for assessment of those drugs is the same for any other drug. And it happens within the National Centre for Pharmacoeconomics. And yes, their process is transparent. We can see it. We can see what happened with the HTA analysis. What happens after that is the problem. It's the decision. And what was really good with the cystic fibrosis case is the people involved communicated with the patient organisation. But if you're a patient where there's only 2 or 3 of you in the country, and we've seen this in the last 6 months, we've seen this, those patients have nowhere to go to talk to the people who make the decisions. And I know the people around this table, both from the Department of Health and the HSE, have been working with us, in terms of how do we involve the patient within that. Because what happens then is they go to the public and they go to the media, which is what they're entitled to do. But really, we should have a process, and I think that issue is going to come up again and again in a country where budgets matter.
Avril, you wanted to come in?
Morning, Carol and committee members. I'd just like to pick up on Deputy Kelleher's point around research and whether we've made any progress around collaboration. And just to introduce myself briefly first, my name is Avril Kennan. I was a researcher in the genetics of rare diseases for many years and now work with the patient advocacy organisation, Deborah Ireland. My worry around research is that it'll be seen as a luxury in the context of the national plan. I think, under the current constraints, it's very easy to focus on the more immediate aspects, which are so important. But if we're seeing research as a sort of standalone item, then we're looking at it in the wrong way. It is actually integral to every single aspect of the plan. Obviously, going back to the developments made in understanding the genetics underlying rare conditions has been an absolutely essential element in progress towards diagnosis, and there's still many rare diseases for which the underlying causes are not known. There are still people out there who never get a diagnosis, so there's a huge amount of work to be done in that perspective. It's also around looking at our current support for patients, and the best way to do that is an evidence-based way where you actually analyse very carefully how are patients interacting with the health services, what are the quality of life issues for them, and then of course the thing that we all think about, the cures and the therapies, which are essential, and for some we've made great progress, for others we're still a very long way off. But even for those conditions that we're a long way off, we can't underestimate the hope factor. I always think it must be such a dark place for anybody living with a rare disease to know that there is nobody out there interested in your condition and doing something to try and progress treatments. So we still have a long way to go in terms of collaboration. I think we've made some progress in recent times, and we have a strong centre in UCD, for instance. But we're going to have to take a number of steps to improve things. And one of the main ones being to facilitate research within the health services, because we haven't been very good at that in Ireland. And I think, as John spoke about, we need to be doing research within the centres of expertise, because apart from anything else, that's been shown to improve patient care. We also need to, one of the recommendations in the national plan is to establish a network for rare disease researchers. So we need to think about that, and as you've all spoken about, the national office is not going to have the capability to do that in the short term, and yet by forming networks, that will open the door to EU funding. And actually there is reasonable amounts of EU funding for rare disease now, but we have to ensure that our researchers are ready to take advantage of that. And then we also need to ensure that under the new strategy for science, technology and innovation, that our funding agencies have the capacity to fund rare disease research, because it has been very challenging to get funding for research on the more basic end of the spectrum in recent times. And finally, I would very much like to see a research representative on the proposed implementation plan and oversight committee for the national plan. Thank you.
Ms. Byrne?
I suppose most of the deputies mentioned about the resources in the national office, and the Deputy Quavian O'Callaghan, you mentioned how it wasn't mentioned in the service plan. And I suppose the HSE in developing the service plan for 2015 were working with, as you can appreciate, a limited budget and lots of requests for resources. And at the time that the service plan was being developed, we were not in a position at that time to have money available for the office, but subsequent to publishing the service plan, we were able to allocate the money. That is why it wasn't mentioned in the service plan, because there was no funding specifically available at that time. But we recognised, the HSE recognised the need for it, and we sourced the funding and made it available in 2015 on a half year, with the review to in 2016 its full year funding for the office. I acknowledge it probably seems like a small amount of staff, but I think that given we're going from a low base where there was nothing in place, where we have no central registry, where we have no central information, and for the HSE to plan and deliver services on an ongoing basis, we need the information to help us make that informed decision. What are the services? Because having the office is not what it's all about. It's what is. We need to be able to provide the specialist services, but to ensure that we're planning that we're putting medical education in place for that, then we need to have the registry and that information. So I think that it's a start. It's not where we want to start, but it is a start. With regard to the National Centre for Genetics, I know it's been brought up by Professor Crown, Deputy Kelleher. It is going to be in the Children's Hospital. There is going to be genetic services in the Children's Hospital. There has been numerous international, benchmarking done. There has been, whether the full service goes into the Children's Hospital, you have to appreciate that 60% of genetic services is for adults and only 40%. So, and there has to be, where it's placed on the site, but it is within the service for the new Children's Hospital.
If I may ask you that, because we got a briefing from the patient groups involved in the Rare Disease Task Force, and they said to us that there has been virtually no efforts to inform or consult with patient groups. Is that the case? Can that be changed and accommodate them, include them?
Can I come back to
Sure.
that? I will get a confirmation on that and what consultation was done. So I think that with them, and in regard to the now calling it part of it, the service in Crumlin versus the National Centre, a review had been done on the services being currently delivered in the genetics department service in Crumlin. You're absolutely right. Professor Crown made a very good point that it was considered as part of the Crumlin funding, and when budgets were cut, that budget was cut also. So there is now a steering committee has been set up with some international expertise to advise on what the genetic service should look like, and they are to report within the next 6 months to the HSE.
Can I just bring in Adrian? Can I just bring in Adrian?
Oh, yeah, sorry about
Sorry.
that.
I'll bring in Adrian and I'll bring it back. Okay. If you can be very short, please.
Yeah, very short. Just 2 points really. First of all, there is funding going into rare disease research, and there is a matched funding process through the Medical Research Charities Group and the HRB, and I think it's important to mention that we didn't get that funding this year. We're hopefully going to get it next year, but that means that €1 million has not gone into rare disease research this year, and that's a very important point to make, I think. But also in the context of common diseases and their relationship with rare diseases, a lot of common conditions, particularly in the area of cancer and heart disease, are being broken down now because we're understanding and characterising these diseases better into a rare conditions. So we need to understand better that what we're talking about here is really how we're going to deliver care into the future for future needs. And so when we consider it to be a rare conditions,
there are going to have impact in how we deliver care to more common diseases as we go forward.
Deputy Keller, Deputy O'Quilla and Senator Broken. If you could be tight, please.
Just back to the National Centre for Medical Genetics. Am I to take it that we will have a national centre for medical genetics, regardless of the location? I presume the purpose it is there to test for genetic testing. That will be for both paediatrics and for adults. I mean, is it going to be specifically a designated national centre, or what is the case? And why does it make a difference where it's located as such, as long as it is doing what it's meant to be doing?
Okay. Ms. Bernadette.
Coming back to the HSE in coming months with regard to that, and we will have more information at that time.
Okay.
What the National Centre will
do.
Okay. Very tight, please.
Just on the same issue in terms of response to Senator Van Turnhout earlier, Helen, that you know, it was intended to incorporate such a facility within the new National Paediatric Facility, presumably on the St James's site, if that's the way it's to proceed. But you know, that's not expected to come on stream until 2019 at the earliest. This is 2015, February. What's to happen in the interim? Can you anticipate at all that we're going to see at least an interim facility up and running pending the commissioning of the new National Paediatric Centre? And my last question, just John, in relation to, you glossed over a little bit in relation to my point about the oversight and an oversight committee. I want to go back to that. There were 48 recommendations in terms of the national plan. There are 48, you know, critical points to be undertaken. You know, will there be an oversight committee? Is it the steering committee that are to, you know, carry out this function in the interim period, or will there be an oversight committee? And how inclusive will it be? I happen to believe that it needs to be more representative of many of the groupings of rare disease, and there can be, a number can be. I think that there needs to be more direct involvement, and I believe that oversight requires that very focused and that very intimate relationship where people most directly affected have an opportunity to ensure that what's proposed is actually delivered and at the earliest opportunity.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Just very briefly. Yeah. No, sorry, I didn't mean to gloss over the point. I think it's a very relevant question. I think what we're saying is our focus initially was to engage on a number of key issues with the HSE around, like the programme, the office, and a process around access to orphan drugs and so on. And indeed, in fact, our National Steering Committee is meeting the next couple of weeks to discuss this very issue, because and our National Steering Committee is very representative, I think, as you know. So I think it may well be, and Tony's expressed a view here, that maybe this is the National Steering Committee, so we're quite open in terms of what works best. It was just that we didn't actually have a meeting of the Oversight Committee, so-called, because a lot of the changes that were taking place at the time, but we wanted to continue to do business with the HSE. We did so. So I think in the next couple of weeks, whether it's the steering committee that takes on this role or something different, I think as long as they do the right things, that we monitor the plan and everything else. And let's not forget that we are, and we have to, and we will be reporting on a whole pile of key indicators in relation to our progress in relation to the rare disease plan. I mean, that isn't, that's actually in our report. You'll see that there's about 20 or 30 indicators we're going to report on, and that'll be very much part of what we'll be making available to everybody, that information.
Tony, you indicated.
Just very briefly, we're talking about the provision of services for rare disease and symptom management. The symptoms of many of those affected by rare disease are common symptoms which are similar to common conditions, so they can be managed the same, so symptom management. But we must act about what's happening now. The state relies on families and carers to look after all these affected, quite simply. And most of them are getting it at no cost, no financial benefit. The least they could do is give them a break, a bit of respite and additional support. It'll give her better mental health futures for those involved, and also support the families directly. I think it has to be, we have to make a proactive approach to support them while all the other work is continuing into the future.
I can confirm that there will be genetic services in the interim. for the new, in advance of the new children's hospital.
Thank you. Will there be national funding for the existing local unit? Will there be an acknowledgement that it is providing a national service so that they don't have to fight with the management of Crumlin for a share of the local pie?
That is the report that we're going to get in the next couple of months from the group, the steering group, with regard to how the genetics should be developed and run as a separate service.
I'll make a little bet with you that they will tell you need to have a service there right now, and that they should just make a modest increase in the funding to allow it to perform a national function without having it nickel and dime by the local hospital management pending the development of the national service. But we can wait for the report. My opinion is free.
Senator Burke.
Chair, I raised the issue about the cross-border healthcare directive and the treatment abroad office. No, you didn't respond to that, and I really think it's a big issue. Can I have a response?
Just about the treatment abroad scheme, it operates currently within the Health and Wellbeing Division, excuse me, of the HSE, of course, the treatment abroad scheme deals with much more than rare diseases.
I'm aware of that.
And much of what their work is engaged with protocols. So many of the diseases, the treatments, the care pathways are well defined, and the treatments are well defined. But there is recognition. It's currently run largely by public health consultants, and the director of acute hospitals, Liam Woods, recently met the director of wellbeing, that division, because there's recognition they need more specialist support, the public health consultants, in deciding and arbitrating on treatments, especially for rarer conditions. So our division is working with wellbeing to define how we can give them access timely specialist support for conditions that are not protocol driven, for which answers are required in a much more timely way than people receive now.
Or streamlined process for dealing with it. I mean, this is where the problem is arising, in that people are left in mid-air for quite a long period of time, not knowing whether they're going to be able to get the required support for that treatment abroad, or if not, and I've come across a number of cases where it went around in circles for 3-4 months, which I think is unfair to the families and is unfair to the patient concerned.
No, I agree. It's not fair. Of course, that arises where, for some reason, the treatment abroad scheme refuses or doesn't allow the application to proceed. In the great majority of cases, the treatment is approved, and in most cases, there's a protocol that allows the people to sign off on whatever treatment is required. But you're right, waiting too long. It requires to be streamlined. It requires quicker access to specialist opinion for those rarer conditions that are not protocol driven.
And just in relation to transposing up the directive, and setting up the structures for dealing with the cross-border care directive.
I'm not clear about the question, sorry.
Well, basically, the cross-border, the EU cross-border healthcare directive, has that been transposed, and have we set up a procedure for implementation of it?
I can't answer that question. We'll come back to you.
Will you please? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And very briefly.
Question probably for the Department of Health, the transposing of the clinic cross-border directive. It's completely different to the treatment abroad scheme, by the way.
It is, yeah.
And I know, Senator Burke, you're familiar with this because we would have had an event around this last year where the Commission were over to try and get Ireland to transpose the cross-border directive. I mean, it makes a lot of sense from what we've talked about this morning. We have to work outside of Ireland in terms of treatment for conditions where you might only have one person in the country with it. They have to be able to travel. And what we're seeing more and more is patients with rare conditions who need to travel, even to London, are finding it really difficult, and they're waiting longer than 3 months. They're waiting years to get access to that. And so we would really urge that we treat rare diseases in a slightly different way. As the political theorists used to say, in democracies where people are discriminated against, we need to positively discriminate in their favour. And I'm stealing that from Professor David Smith, who quoted it at a meeting of ours this week. And we need to look at that within the context of rare diseases, within the treatment abroad scheme, and within access to treatment and care. So.
Very good. That's a good point. And maybe we might ask the National Rare Diseases Plan, or the briefing that we got from the patient groups involved in the Rare Disease Task Force, they might update the briefing to include the fact that the HSE, even though it hasn't mentioned in the service plan, that Ms. Burns commented that the money and the funding have been available, just to be fair in terms of being positive as well. And I want to thank the group for the very excellent presentation and research that we got. Can I thank you all for coming? Can I thank you most sincerely and wish you, all of us need on a journey to continue to be advocates and to pursue the implementation of the plan and to understand that, as you said quite rightly, Avril, rare doesn't mean few. And from our committee perspective, we are committed to working with all of you to ensure that we do have a very successful and strong implementation of the plan. So with that, we stand adjourned until next Thursday at 9:30.